Hi, this is Robert with Cruzbike, and today we're going to be building the next 6th version of the Cruzbike S40. Your Cruzbike S40 comes in a nice compact box. A lot of the pre-assembly is done. Let's open it up and see what we have. First thing we're going to remove is the seat. We'll set that aside for the moment. Once we remove the seat, we'll look around for any other loose items that we have in here, which will be the headrest. Also in the box will be the seat pad, which you will remove. The suspension adjustable headrest will also be in there, as well as the standard headrest pad. We also have the parts box. And in the parts box, we have all the small items that we'll need later, including the through axles, the pedals, our parts bag where we have some screws for the seat and some other fasteners, the yoke for the seat back, we have our chain, we have our seat extension, and also a mirror is in there as well. We want to carefully remove our wheels. We always want to be careful with the rotors to not bump them around too much or touch them with our bare fingers. We'll set that aside. And we'll take our front wheel. Now, a special note on all the both wheels, when you're removing the end caps off of the ends, we want to make sure that we don't also remove the adapter caps. And I'll get to that a little bit later. We'll remove these couple pieces of cardboard. Now I'm going to be doing my build on this nice carpeted floor. I recommend using a soft surface. You can use the cardboard internal pieces to lay the bike on if you don't have a nice carpeted surface to work on to protect the paint and the frame. Now the main part of the frame should lift right out of the box. And we'll get that out of the way and we'll set this right on the ground. Now the next step, and possibly the longest of the whole process, is removing all of the protective covering. We want to be real careful removing everything. We don't want to scratch the paint. We also want to make sure when we remove the padding from the boom and slider that we're being real careful with the paint on the main frame. Okay, back to the wheels here. When we take the caps off, we want to make sure that we do not lose the end cap for the through axle. Sometimes those end caps can pop off when you pull off the protective covers, so you just want to make sure that when you remove the covers you don't lose the caps. Here we have our headrest tubes all nice and unwrapped, the seat extension, the main seat we have here, the Velcro is already installed, the seat back yoke, we have our through axles. Now note on the through axles on the end you have a tool, and the tool is a Torx wrench for rotors, and also a 6mm Allen for tightening the through axle. Now you can use a normal 6mm Allen. The key though is when you have the tool on the inside, it will not fit through the holes and go into the threads. So in order to install the through axle, the tool has to be removed. We're going to set that aside. Same thing goes for when you remove the through axle. You got to take the tool out. Here we have the pedals. Now note on the pedals, each one is labeled on the inside with a small letter indicating whether it is a left side pedal or a right side pedal. So here and there we can see the notation of which one is which, and that should be on both sides. There we have that one. Now note, that's while you're sitting on the bike. So the right side is the crank side with the chain ring, and the left side is the non-drive side. Now these particular pedals in this batch have a 6mm hole or an Allen for tightening. There's no pedal flats, so we won't be using a 15mm wrench. We also have a mirror which goes on the handlebar if you like when we're all done. Alright, we have our small parts bag where we have a spare derailleur hanger and a spare derailleur hanger bolt. And we also have our other fasteners, including the quick link for the chain should be located in here, as well as all the bolts and washers we need to attach the seat and the seat back yoke. We also have our pivot clamp sleeve in here, which we'll get to. Now you should have a toolkit with your S40, either a black zipper pouch or a clear zipper pouch with some longer tools depending on what we had in stock, so we will be using those. Also in your toolkit you should have a small super lube. We'll be using that to grease the threads and a couple various parts. And once we have all that set aside, I'm going to be using a wheel stand. You certainly don't need a wheel stand to assemble your S40, but it is very helpful. So here we have one of our wheel stands which we sell at cruzbike.com. It can hold the front wheel just like that, which makes it very easy to assemble your S40. If this particular wheel stand isn't your style, we also have our other wheelie stand, which I particularly like because the bike can be moved around on the floor. And this stand just sits just like the other one and just captures the wheel just right like that, nice and secure. So we'll get to that later, but for now let's get ready to begin our assembly. Okay, the first thing we want to do is attach our pivot clamp to the top part of the pivot clamp on the fork. So in order to do that, we're going to get in our parts bag and get out our sleeve and sleeve bolt. Now note, on this particular unit there are 3 washers. All of these washers go on the outside of the top part of the clamp, and 2 washers go on the sleeve side, and 1 washer goes on the threaded bolt side. It's very important that these washers are in the correct order and that they are all on the outside of the pivot clamp that goes around the slider. All right, to make the install of this a little easier, we're going to make sure we put some grease on the sleeve and keep that nice and smooth. And now we're going to route the top of the pivot clamp together with the top part of the clamp on the fork. Now I'm going to do this on the floor because you have a lot of parts hanging around here. It's much easier in my opinion. I'm going to get 2 5mm Allens because each side is a 5mm. And the first thing I'm going to do is remove the bolt from the sleeve and one of the washers. I'm going to make sure that that's all nice and greased up. Okay, once the sleeve is all nice and lubed up, we're going to position the top part of the boom and slider. Now you'll want to be very careful. We'll want to move the cable housings through here without kinking them. So we kind of reposition our cable housings. Once we have that over the top, we can position the top part of the pivot clamp over the fork. Then we can insert the sleeve with the 2 washers on the outside. Now note the 2 washers are needed because it creates a gap where the clamp can actually tighten. So then on the other side we have 1 washer and the threaded portion. And then we'll use 2 Allens. The 5mm Allen on the sleeve side, and then the other side will tighten down with the other 5mm Allen. Now for right now we're just going to make this a little snug because later you're going to want to do a fit and all that stuff, so we just want it to stay put for now. Okay, now let's install the handlebars and the rear derailleur. Rear derailleur first. I'm going to flip the bike over just so it's easier to show in the video. You can flip yours over as well. Okay, so now we have an easier access to the stay where we attach the derailleur. And for this, we're going to need our small 2.5mm Allen to remove our little screw here. Now you have a spare one of these. You just have a spare hanger and screw in your parts bag. The derailleur hanger is already pre-installed on the rear derailleur from the factory. So we're going to simply take our rear derailleur and we're going to position it inside the stay with the hole. It only goes one direction, so don't worry about the alignment. And then once we have that lined up, we're going to tighten our small attachment screw here. Now when we tighten this, we don't want to strip it out, so we're just going to give it a nice little snug. 2 or 3 Newton meters basically if you're using a torque wrench for this, but as long as you don't strip the head out of the bolt, that's fine. Once we have that done, our rear derailleur is installed. Okay, so now we have our boom and pivot clamp. We have our derailleur installed. Now let's attach these handlebars. It'll just kind of make it easier for us when we lift the bike up. So we're going to use a 4mm Allen, and we're going to remove the 2 handlebar clamps. Now these screws I like to put a little grease on, so once we have them off we're going to grease those threads, and then we're going to position our handlebars just like that in the slider, and then install our clamps. We won't worry too much about the alignment of the handlebars now, that's reserved for a fit video. But we're just going to get these nice and snug with an even gap on the top and the bottom of the clamps. Okay, now we're ready to get to the wheels. So here I'm going to use our stand to hold the drive wheel. We're going to have the cassette facing to our right if we're looking at the front end of the bike. Then we're going to lift this thing and we're going to stick it right over the wheel. Now the easiest way to do this is to have our through axle kind of prepared and ready to go. We'll put a little grease on the threads. Alright, that's going to really help us when we insert our through axle through and thread it into the other side of the stay. We're also going to want to have our 5mm Allens handy like we had before. Alright, now holding near the pivot clamp, just to keep the front stay away from the fork, we're going to carefully lift up the entire assembly and set that fork right down onto the wheel, making sure we line up the rotor with the caliper. and then we can align the stay with the fork. Now, in this particular case, it slid right in nice and easy, but usually what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to loosen the boom clamp with a 5mm Allen. And you also, depending on how tightly you tighten the pivot clamp, you might have to just loosen it just a little bit. That will allow us to twist if we need to and turn the stay and align that through axle so it can thread into the other side of the stay nice and smoothly. Once we've done that, we can tighten our boom clamp and pivot clamp down just a little bit and then move on to the rear wheel. Alright, same thing with the front wheel. We have our through axle. We have it greased and ready to go. We're simply going to line up the rotor with those pads and slide that wheel right into the dropouts, and then insert our axle. Now note, through axle, the wheel is actually riding on the axle, not the dropouts. So sometimes even when the wheel is all the way and solidly in the dropout, you might have to wiggle it a little bit to get that through axle all the way through. That's just simply because the dropout is there as a guide, not as a rest for the wheel itself. And once we've tightened that axle, we can stash our tool back in the axle, front and rear. It's up to you. Alright, now since we had our pivot clamp and boom clamp a little loose from before, I'm going to take this opportunity to right our handlebars, making sure our handlebars are nice and level, lined up with the back of the frame. Now again, later you're going to be doing a fit, which I highly recommend taking a look at our fit videos. But for now, we'll just snug these down a little bit just to keep everything secure for the rest of the assembly of the bike itself. Okay, just a quick break for some pro tips. Again, always make sure you have the 2 washers on the outside of the sleeve and the one on the outside of the bolt. The actual boom clamp, it needs to be flush with the end of the tube. That will prevent slippage. Now, a quick little pro tip on our chainstay clamps here. Notice we have a gap front and rear. There's some small O-rings installed over the threads of the bolts. Those act as a nice guide to kind of make sure that you don't clamp those all the way tight. So basically, once we have these secure nice and evenly, we're going to snug these down against those O-rings, making sure that the space on the bottom bracket is even left and right. And once we have a nice even hand-tight snug on both bolts, we're going to simply do a 1/4 to 1/2 turn past snug for both bolts, one after the other. That's really as tight as these need to get. If you tighten them all the way down to where the surfaces are touching without the O-rings, they risk breaking. So we just want to make sure that we have a gap front and rear. Okay, now we're going to loosen our Perez clamp so it's just hanging all the way down in the frame. If you are not going to use the headrest on your S40, then you can simply remove the Perez clamp. Just simply hold it with a finger, remove the bolts, and it will lift right out of the top hole just like that. Now, same thing if you need to install the Perez clamp, and we're going to leave it in for the rest of the installation, but very easy. You just have your 2 long bolts, and then you're simply going to slide it in through the holes with the curved side facing the down part of the frame. And now, in order to insert our headrest tubes, we're only going to insert a few threads into the Perez clamp for the moment, because we want it to be resting all the way down against the frame for clearance of the headrest tubes. And once that's in, we can slide our headrest tubes right in through the Perez clamp and then tighten that. We're going to tighten those 2 bolts with our 3mm Allen. That'll lift that Perez clamp up against the tubes to kind of act like a nice little stop. Now these only need to be snug enough to prevent the headrest tubes from pulling in and out. They don't have to be over tightened. Okay, let's do a seat install. So out of our parts bag, we have our bolts that we need for the front part of the seat. We have 2 washers, 2 nuts, and 2 bolts. And we're going to put the washers on the bolts. We have our 8mm nut driver and our 3mm Allen as well. And we're going to put our bolts through the slots in the seat extension. The fit will be tight. You can't thread it through there. We don't want this thing sliding around. I like to set them all the way at the bottom so we have maximum extension. So once we have that, we can insert that onto the seat through the front holes, as you see here. And once we have that, we're going to insert the seat. We're just going to hold this together with our hands. And we're going to go right around here and put those holes right through the seat mount on the frame. And once we have that on, we can use our 2 M5 nylock nuts, and we'll install those on the bottom side of the bolts. And when we tighten these, we only need to tighten them down until the end of the bolt reaches the end of the nylock nut. Now note, you will have 2 spare nylock nuts in the parts bag. Those are extra, just in case these ones cross thread or you need to replace one at some point. Okay, now let's use our other 2 bolts and install our seat back yoke through these 2 top holes in the seat, going around the frame. Now I always like to add a little grease to the holes of the yoke. This keeps the seat cleaner so we don't have grease all over our carbon fiber seat. So we'll put a little grease in these holes here. And we'll have our 2 bolts at the ready and our 3mm Allen. Now you want to eyeball this really close and just get that bolt in there. And then move that seat right over and line up the first bolt with the first hole. I like to get just 2 or 3 threads into the clamp, just so it's nice and secure on one side, and then install the other bolt. And once you have both bolts installed in the yoke, then we're going to tighten those down evenly. We'll just go back and forth and tighten each side alternatively until the seat is secure to the frame and not moving, so we don't hear any creaking or movement. It's important to note that the yoke will not be completely flush to the seat. There will be a slight gap there. That's so that those bolts can pull down and create tension, using that Velcro as a sort of padding. So once that is nice and secure, then we don't need to tighten those bolts any further. Okay, let's get some pedals installed here. We're going to add some grease to the threads of the pedals. We have our 6mm Allen wrench at the ready. I'm going to remove the small bag from the crank. It has our pedal washers. Now, pedal washers, these particular SRAM cranks have some nice gaps for pedal washers, so we'll use them here. I typically do not, other than on carbon cranks, but that's up to you. We're going to make sure we have our right and our left side pedals properly. I'm going to insert our pedal washer. And now note the pedals are reverse thread. So here on the left side crank, when the crank is rotating backwards, the pedal would be tightening. So we're going to make sure that these are nice and tight. A common reason for cranks or pedals to fall out and crank holes to get destroyed is loose pedals. So you always want to make sure your pedals are secure, and also that you check your pedals on occasion as a regular maintenance item, making sure that they have a nice torque so they're not loose and slowly destroying the threads of your cranks. Okay, so in our parts box there's a lone zip tie, and that lone zip tie is to gather up the cables and tie them to the top of the slider. Now you have some nice little loops of cable here, so we're going to even those up, kind of slide those cables down and through the pivot clamp and gather those and attach that zip tie. Tidy up those cables nice and secure. Then we'll clip off the end of that zip tie with a little nippers, or a set of fingernail clippers works equally as well. Okay, now we're going to move on to installing our chain. So we're going to want to make sure that our derailleur is all the way down aligned with the smallest cog. So the shifting for the SRAM is a double tap. So you pull once to make it go back down to the small gear, small cog that is, and then you pull it a double tap into upshift. So we want to make sure it's all the way down. We want it to be lined up with our small cog. We're going to find our quick link in the parts bag and our chain. I recommend wearing gloves because it's a little greasy. There's no need to add any additional grease to the chain. It's perfect as is. We're going to simply take our chain, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drape it over the chain ring and the top of the cassette. So note that the chain ring has wide teeth and narrow teeth, so we're going to want to make sure that the chain is sitting properly on the teeth of the ring. And then we're going to make sure that our chain is resting on the back side of the small cog of the cassette. Okay, our SRAM Apex derailleur comes with a cage lockout, which is going to be very handy. So we're going to pull this forward, and we're going to push and let the cage rest on the lockout, just like that. Now, it's a strong spring, so be careful. You don't want that to snap and hit your finger. So once we have that, we're going to take the chain, we're going to drape it over the top of the first jockey wheel. We want to avoid going over the little metal stopper. So once we have it over the top wheel, we're going to pull it under the second wheel. And now, since we have a lot of chain slack handy, we're going to install our quick link on the chain, and we're going to make sure that that is nice and attached for now. It's not going, you're not going to be able to pull this by hand, but you just want to make sure for the moment it is secure, just like that. Now, in order to fully attach the quick link, if you don't have a chain tool to do that, it's very easy to do. So we're going to simply grab at the quick link and make sure that we hold it together. Okay, so now we can simply rotate the chain around until the quick link is at the top part of the chain. So our quick link is now located at the top part of the chain. And now once we have that, we're going to very carefully, making sure that our quick link is still attached but not yet fully secure, we're going to release the tension on the derailleur. And so now, in order to close the link, we're simply going to add some pressure to the crank as if we're pedaling the bike. So we're simply going to pull it and watch. Click, just like that. So now we've closed that quick link. All right, only other few things to go. We're going to install our pad. So we have our Velcro. We have 2 straps at the top and 2 at the base. So if your Velcro is not already attached to the pad, we're simply going to attach it like this on each strap. Now the top piece I like to put as close down as possible, just so I can use the maximum amount of Velcro without cutting it. Then we're going to install our 2 pieces on the side. I like to make them look nice and even. Now we're going to install the pad. Like, note I've kind of bent the pad a little bit for a nice fit. Yours will be nice and perfectly flat, but you can kind of pre-bend it a little bit. We're going to install the bottom first. Now note, once you take this protective backing off the Velcro and stick it, it is not going to come off. So this is industrial grade adhesive here. So we're going to line up the front of the pad with the front of the seat extension. We're going to push down on those Velcro, make sure that's nice and secure. Make sure we're nice and level with the seat from side to side. And once we have those on, we can remove the protective backing from the middle and top piece and very carefully line those up against the seat, just like that, nice and smooth. Okay, so assuming you are going to use a headrest on your S40, this version of the S40 comes with the suspension adjustable headrest, which was a great addition. You want to assemble that per the instructions included. And once you have that assembled, you can make a decision. So we can use our stock headrest pad, which simply slides over. And then again, that headrest assembly moves in and out of the frame. So you can use that. Or alternatively, you can use the suspension adjustable headrest, which clamps to the frame just like this. We use our 5mm Allen to install this to the headrest tubes. Now, having the headrest tubes installed in the frame allows us to use the suspension adjustable headrest. It also allows us to install the race case on the back if you're going to be using that as an accessory. That can be moved up and down to adjust for comfort, and also along with the up and down can move in and out with the tubes itself, which is very easy to do by simply loosening the Perez clamp with a 3mm Allen right through the access holes in the seat. You only have to loosen it a few turns, and then we can move those headrest tubes in and out, giving you adjustment for a real comfortable position for your neck. Alright, that does the assembly for your Cruzbike S40. I highly recommend watching our other fit videos for you to get properly dialed in on your bike, and also check out our forum at cruzbike.com. As always, if you have questions, please contact us at support@cruzbike.com. And happy riding, and welcome to Cruzbike.